The Argentine playoffs are pretty much a trip, aren't they? Because there's day one with the quarterfinals. Everything was pretty much expected. No one really was going in and thinking that Aldo Civi and or Defensa were going to win. But nobody thought they were going to lose the way they did. That's what ends up being that much more shocking. But day two just left you aghast of what ended up happening, because number one, many were talking about how Estudiantes ended up being one of the more dominant teams in Argentine football. Yes, correct. But at the same time, when you started to see what they were able to offer on the pitch, weren't a lot of variations. Wasn't a lot of differences. Sending the ball forward, let's fight forward. It's kind of like shifting the theater of battle from one end to the other. We have the ball here, we fight for the ball here. We send it over there, we fight for the ball over there. And that's how it basically ends up being, for the most part. When you start to understand what Gimnasia, I'm saying Gimnasia for some reason, but Estudiantes look to do, and when they look to do it against a team that is better organized, and better organized so much to an extent that when Argentinos goes down a man, they play better. It wasn't necessarily that they were more galvanized. They were, I guess, aware of what they had to do. But it was understanding what the limitations of the opposition was and having to force the opposition into tapping into those limitations. Deep ball, let's see what we can do, and when they can't do it, okay, well, that's it. So we have to try that again, and try it again, and try it again. And we know, we've heard the saying of, the solutions that are used over and over again to try and get a different result. And that ended up being Estudiantes on today, in this quarterfinal. Shocking? Maybe to a certain extent, especially when they played at home, because of the solidity they showed. And to that extent, we ended up seeing a team that, they were solid, but sometimes you need dynamic. Sometimes you need something different, something that can make you become a cut above, that can set you apart from the rest. It never happened. It never emerged. And that's why Argentinos juniors ended up advancing and going into the semifinals. And they're going to face Tigre. Tigre, for those of you that aren't familiar, actually more than that, about 5-6 months ago, we're playing in the second division. Diego Martinez is probably one of the more interesting coaches in Argentine football. But yet no one knows him. That's the thing that you end up kind of wondering about this whole business that is coaching. Is it about the style? Is it about the fluff? Is it about the look? Because on the other end, you have a coach like Fernando Gago, who is a lot of flash, dresses sharp, but it's part of his look. It's part of what he is. It's what he embodies, and what he embodied as a player as well. Certain elegance, both with the ball at his feet, but also with every aspect of look. Just looks dapper. That's not Diego Martinez. What Diego Martinez is a coach that loves X's and O's, doesn't like to talk a lot, doesn't like to give the spiel about coaching and coaching philosophies and philosophies of life and all those other things. And that's what makes him different. That's what makes him such an important and and fundamental part of this Tigre side. A Tigre side that has been working on this philosophy of play for over a year, and it's transferred over. Mind you, you hear a lot about teams and their transactions during the transfer market. You can't go and say Tigre have a team where you can say that they're superstars or they're stars in the making, anything along those lines. You really wouldn't go and start saying, hey, X or Y player for Tigre can play at Boca, can play at River, can play at Flamengo, can play at any of the big teams in South America. Maybe he ends up getting a transfer over to Europe. So much so, you have a couple of them. Case in point, Mateo Retegui ends up being, well, jettisoned from Talleres. He ends up coming to Tigre. Today, he ends up being one of the heroes against River. Facundo Colidio, one of the young stars of Boca's youth system, ends up going to Inter Milan, star at the Primavera. But then he kind of hits that glass ceiling, if you will. You know, he's way too good for the youth system, for the reserves. But yet there's no room for him in the first team. So what happens? Well, he goes on loan, goes to Tigre. And today he ends up being the hero because he scores the eventual game winner. 2 Boca youth products scoring goals for Tigre and knocking River out at the Monumental. How poetic could that be? But it's more than that. I mean, let's not get into waxing poetic, if you want to call it that. It ends up being about a team that understands what they play, how they play, and where they need to be in order to play at the best possible level. And they played a Riverside that's not the best Riverside in, maybe you can say, in the last 8 years. Does it mean that they're a good side? Yeah, it does mean that River's still good. They're still a very good side. They're just not what River has been able to do in terms of that bar that they've set that's so high within South American football. That's the big issue there. A River team, and I mentioned it during the broadcast today, that Juan Pablo Varki, which is a very famous Argentine journalist, said, can River beat anyone? Yes, they can beat anyone. The problem with this River, though, is that they can be beat by anyone as well. And today was the case. When you face a team that's organized and you don't end up being sharp, when you face a team with purpose, when you face a team that is able to create and not drop back and defend incessantly, which Tigre didn't. If you look at the beginning of the match, Tigre was the one that was imposing conditions, so much so that they scored, in the 4th minute? They had a chance to be able to score a first 2 minutes before that. They probably could have scored 3 in that first half. So that's where you end up seeing River end up having problems. Yeah, they gave away the first half. Did they play better in the second? Yeah, they did. But it wasn't good enough. Yeah, how many shots did they have on target outside of the goal that ends up being scored by Enzo Fernandez, which is a goal from another context, another match? Not many. Julian Alvarez was lost. Pochettino was lost. So much so that Tigre gave them out wide. They said, you guys want to send crosses? Send them all day. We're here. And River won very few of those crosses. Tigre were just clearing everything out, winning the second balls, recovering 50-50s, being able to play out, being able to break out, being able to transition and break them down defensively. That's where you ended up seeing all these problems, all these issues with River. That's where you started to see things breaking down. And River just didn't respond. River had no answers. And this River hasn't had any answers when the situation has called for them to be able to find one. It just hasn't happened. So when you start analyzing all of this, then you end up having a better idea of why River are not at this level. Can they? Yeah, they could. But it's a long way. And obviously the newer transactions haven't been up to snuff. Not saying they're not good. I'm just saying that they didn't have the opportunities or the consistency to be able to create the necessary opportunities or the necessary level that is acceptable for this River team. And man, am I looking forward to Saturday, because I'll be doing Boca and Racing. Could it be the final anticipated? Maybe. But right now, those are the two teams that are in the best form coming into this round. Although, what happened on Wednesday, I think that could be up for dispute as well. We'll see. Well, time for our mailbag segment. And it wasn't just one person. It was a few people asking me the same question. Of course, all of it developing from the case where FIFA officially decides to investigate the Ecuadorian FA over what happened with Byron Castillo. It's not the first time that happens in Ecuadorian football, and I can tell you that because I did an article back in 2015 when where I was talking about it, so much so that I followed up on a story because a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, Alejandro Echeverry, he ends up breaking news about illegal and improper uses of birth certificates as far as players not being registered with the Ecuadorian FA in the proper manner. There's a lot of abnormalities in player selections. Back in the 2015, I think, yeah, it was in the South American Championships. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, so bear with me as I might switch around in terms of my my information or the dates. I think Ecuador had a great group of young players coming up. Fabiano Tello, João Montaño, those are the two that end up coming to mind. And it was Montaño, and then also it was Andy Casquete, who was another one that ended up having some issues. So much so that some of them were born in Colombia. Before I hear anyone get judgmental and start, because, it only happens in South America and Africa. Or, hey, man, God, those guys over there, know what? Shut up. You don't know. Some of these individuals find it might be out of convenience. I'll give you that. Some were because when they were children, they escaped very unfavorable situations, crossing the border. I mean, look, some of the conditions where these people came from weren't the most favorable, so they ended up going across the border to Ecuador, where things were a little bit less hectic, a little bit less crazy, a little bit less violent, if you will. So from that perspective, one has to empathize. Many of their parents, the last thing that they were thinking about was registering them for a birth certificate or something along those lines. Fine. I can buy that too. Because when you're in those types of conditions, it's just not something that a parent thinks about. And this is not me talking. This is individuals that have dealt with those types of situations talking, and they that's fine. And I don't want to try and justify it, and I'm not. but it is something that they go through. When it comes to football, it's a different story, because you need actual documentation that, first of all, you were born in a certain country. You need that documentation regardless. The problem is that many FA execs turn the other way and say, well, yeah, it looks legal. Okay, cool. And it was legal enough. When you end up dealing with these types of things, the anomalies, the nationality questions, it's part of that entire web of suspicion that you end up emerging. And like I said, I understand one end, but when one end starts becoming judgmental of the other for reasons that they have no clue about, that's where I end up having a problem. There was one, like I said, Andy Casquete was one of them. It appeared that his original birth date was back in 1995, and then his birth date was changed to 1998. I think it was February 20-something, 23rd, 24th, something like that, which made him eligible to play for the under-17s in 2015. I think it would made him 17. There was a letter from an obstetrician that supposedly was present when he was born that made him have the appropriate age, but then the obstetrician said they weren't there. You know, when some of these players were born, they had one name and they were first registered as one name. Then all of a sudden they were known as another, and they were re-registered at some point. Oh, well, he wasn't born this year. He was born that year. And it made that player a certain age. So when you start seeing those things, yeah, you end up raising those suspicions. And again, this is very familiar within Ecuadorian football. I'm just talking about the incident that I wrote about. That under-17 South American Championship back in 2015. So for people to tell me that it's not possible, I give you an example right there. Just start looking at the names. Fabiano Tello. Start looking at the names. Andy Casquete. Start looking at those type of names, and you start seeing exactly what happened. Now, when you started looking at it, it's deeper than that. It's the players and then the entities themselves saying, hey, it's legal enough. Now, you fast forward a little bit, and then all of a sudden, today, as a matter of fact, one of the lawyers for the Ecuadorian FA says, you know what? If they find out that this is illegal, I'm talking about FIFA, well, then it's the player's fault and the FA should not be suspended. Wait a second. I thought that you guys made due diligence and you checked that everything was legal and everything was okay. So why are you now throwing all the weight of justice on top of the player when you were the one that ratified that the player, what they were turning in, was in fact legal? You see what I'm saying? On top of that, these are youngsters that came in some cases, not all of them, okay? Just so you understand. They came in from another country as in this case, Colombian nationals. And they entered the country illegally, and they somehow were re-registered, and the re-registering, and they just threw whatever date. The problem was that it's not so, it was cut and dry then. It's not so cut and dry now. That's the difference. It was cut and dry then because you had the actual documentation there. Here, you don't know what's real and what's not. Although, in FIFA's case, it was enough for them to raise an investigation. What does that mean? Well, quite simple, because I know I'm getting a little long-winded with this explanation. Could mean that Ecuador's out of a World Cup. Or Chile could come in, Ecuador lose points. What about the other teams? What about Colombia? We don't really hear too much about that, did we? We just hear about Chile's complaint, which Chile is infamous for that because they did the same thing leading up to the 2018 World Cup. with Bolivia, but what ended up happening, they ended up benefiting Peru instead. Part of the reason why Peru gets past them, part of the reason why Peru ends up in the playoff spot and Chile doesn't. So you end up seeing that there's going to be a lot of talk. It's 190 something days, 195, 196 days to the World Cup. That's the problem. I guess that's the problem. There's still a lot of time and there's still a lot of possibilities. So much so that the other day on Chilean television said, hey, if we play the World Cup, this is going to be how our calendar looks in the group stage. Yes, you heard me right. This ends up being a bureaucratic issue that ends up being a diplomatic issue to a certain extent. It ends up being a very red tape filled type of situation where individuals weren't diligent with the proper controls and you did not end up seeing things. I'm actually putting the link to the article that I put back in 2015 in so you get an idea of what that story was about, how things played out, and of course I can give you a teaser. Ecuador ended up going to the Under-17 World Cup. So just so you know, that's how things played out. So will it be a repeat situation? Maybe. Because it's starting to look very similar. We'll see how it plays out. But you know what? It's going to be very interesting to look at it and see what precedents are established. Because what is cut and dry is the fact that FIFA's now involved. And now it's anyone's ball game. Anything can happen in this type of situation. I know I was a bit long-winded. I know my explanation was extended. But I think it was worth the time to be able to explain that. I did get a couple of questions. I have to give a lot of love to the people in India because there's one group, of course, that Kerala Blasters fans have been phenomenal. So I really thank them and many throughout India. And the question, Jorge Pereyra Díaz, as I put on social media, I spoke to his agent. He still has a contract with Platense. He doesn't plan on going back. He's looking, or his agent is already looking to go abroad. And if it's India, great. If it's not, that's great too. But it's going to be the best offer that is being offered at that moment, and it's on the table. That's the one that they're going to take. Can it be back with the Blasters? Yes, it could be. Could it be elsewhere in India? Yes. Could it be anywhere else in Europe? Yes. Could it be somewhere in Asia? Yes. Could it be somewhere else in South America? Yes. So that's my answer as of right now. Can it change tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? Yes, that too. But for the most part, that's the short answer to something that is still a long ways away. Because if he is going to India, he still does have time to kind of settle things down, settle whatever pending issues he has, and solve the contract dispute that he has with a Platense side that is basically cleaning house compared to what they had coming into the 2021 season when they were recently coming back to the first division. Many of those players that were part of that team are no longer there as of Wednesday, May 11th. Guys, it's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon. And again, make sure you listen to the different podcasts. Make sure you're checking everything out. And I'm going to be having some interviews in the next couple of weeks. I look forward to hearing from you. Your suggestions are always welcome. I'll talk to you soon, man. Take care. Thank you so much. And again, I appreciate everything you guys do. Bye.